Well, thanks for tuning in to the Ministry Minded podcast. It is so good to have, I can call him my friend now since we've met on Substack, Griffin Gooch on the podcast. How are you doing, Griffin?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on here.
Oh, man. Ever since, I don't even know how we got connected, honestly. Somehow through Substack. Well, I feel like Substack has kind of like exploded recently, at least in terms of like users and followers and whatnot. And then for whatever reason, the algorithm gods brought us together, and I've just enjoyed getting to know you through your writing and through the things that you publish. So I'm really excited to kind of get to know you more here. For those who aren't familiar, kind of introduce yourself. Where you are, what kind of keeps you busy, and some of the things that you're interested in, what you write about, and stuff like that.
Yeah, so again, my name is Griffin Gooch. I just turned 28. I live in Kalamazoo, Michigan with my wife, Tiffany. We both love to read. It's pretty much our main hobby. And we're heavily involved in our local church. It's a Radiant Church. It's a neo-Pentecostal church. We love it. And personally, just vocationally, I am getting my PhD in theology at the University of Aberdeen right now, but studying at a distance because both of our families live right in the area and we love them. And we kind of wanted to, keep that close family net around. And just in my free time, just in general, beyond doing PhD and stuff, I like to write frequently. It's like one of the callings that I feel like God's put on my life. And so I write a lot on Substack, and on there, most of my essays have to do with connecting theological doctrine with other academic disciplines. So a lot of the research that I do is usually involved in like psychology or sociology or really just any other kind of discipline. That's a lot of the research that I do is in other fields, but then I like to make connections between those other fields and theology to make it not for the sake of being like theology is cool and all of this stuff is compatible. I hope to ultimately say that theology is like the highest of all the academic disciplines and everything is ordered under it. But look at these interesting things here and there that might help illuminate some of the smaller details about theology so that like when we're looking at everything all together, it can kind of make more sense in a more cohesive worldview.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of ways in which a lot of those areas intersect and overlap with the study of theology, which makes, I think, studying those other avenues kind of open up for us, as you kind of mentioned. What's the focus of your PhD? You say you're getting a PhD in theology. What's kind of like your main focus?
Oh man, so
or is there not a main focus?
Well, no. So it's funny because I'm still in my first year, and so every time I meet with my advisor, he's like, "This is going to change so much. Like you're going to cut out like half of this," and he's probably right to a certain extent. But my basic thesis, my basic general idea that is surrounding it right now, and it's like, I mean, I have like 80,000 words written for it right now, but I'm probably going to end up cutting out like at least 40,000 of those. But the general idea is that it's a theology of social status. So I remember around 3 years ago, I was reading a few books that were talking about this thing called the psychology of social status. And I looked a little bit more into it, and I found that there was a bunch of these studies by psychologists, social scientists that found that a fundamental human need, something that humans crave on par with things like money or even like food, water, shelter, is social status. They want to feel as though they belong and that they have esteem in the eyes of their peers. They really care about their relative social standing, so much so that it can even trump money in some cases. So there's been plenty of studies that they did where they would ask people just in general, would you prefer like $100,000 a year, or would you $100,000 a year where everybody else makes $75,000 a year? Would you prefer $175,000 a year, but everybody else makes $185,000 a year? And most people pick the scenario where they make $100,000 a year and everybody else makes $75,000 a year, even though it's technically less money. And so stuff like that just got me thinking a lot about just the interactions that Jesus has with the Pharisees and how he is so upset with the way that they are constantly showing off their status or their religious piety. And so, I mean, if you look at Matthew 23, I mean, Jesus was like love embodied, right? Like, so he was love. He was walking around just as the most perfect embodiment of love that's ever existed. And yet Matthew 23 is the most scathing critique, like maybe like I think probably in the Bible for sure, but even just beyond that, it is so intense. He is calling them whitewashed tombs. They're walking around trying to make themselves seem cool or like they look good on the outside, but he's like, I see what's actually beyond that. It's like, you are only posturing yourself. You're cleaning up the outside of the cup or the outside of the tomb, but on the inside there is nothing in there. Like, you are actually dead, for lack of better terminology. And so I started thinking about these things together, and I was just trying to think that there hasn't been a ton of people who've researched this from the kind of standpoint that I was thinking of it with. So we have like Søren Kierkegaard, who was writing, a few hundred years ago, and he had a big theory of human comparison, which is pretty similar in some sense to the psychology of social status. But other than that, not a lot of people have been talking about it. And so I was trying to think about how can I connect these two things into a cohesive whole and bring in a bunch of other different theological doctrines, make sense of it, and also ask about how we as contemporary Westerners who have so many more status signals to deal with. We have social media, we have nice cars, we have just any other, the books that we read, the TV shows that we watch, everything that we can do is like this little subtle status play. Like, I have this taste and I like these things, and these are the clothes that I wear. And
I only listen to indie music.
Yes, exactly. That's one of those things. I actually do that all the time, which is kind of convicting. But even if we're talking like theology, like I do like this guy, but Oliver O'Donovan is like probably one of the highest tier theologians that you can think of. Some of his stuff is like almost incomprehensible, and I really do enjoy him. But at the same time, when people are asking me like, "Oh, who's your favorite theologian?" I find I'm kind of being like, "Oh, I love Oliver O'Donovan," even though it's like I don't necessarily like love and enjoy all of his works. But it's like I know that if I throw that out, like people might respect me a little bit more. So, anyways, that was just a long side trail. I'm trying to see how these things conflate and how we as modern Westerners can actually do better at dealing with social status, because we have so many different ways that we can struggle with it. So I'm trying to figure out, theologically speaking, the early church found a way to transcend all of these different status boundaries. I mean, the Roman world was stratified in so many different ways. It was harsh. It was more harshly stratified than we are nowadays. It was much more harshly stratified. But the early church found a way to de-stratify itself and become a place where people of all social classes, ethnicities, races, gender, income, or even like levels of like perceived piety, they can all come together under this beautiful banner.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And it's a great reminder too, especially as you're reading, like you mentioned Romans. I was thinking about like books like Philippians, or even the letter that Paul writes to Titus, where he's talking about, Titus is going back to these people on Crete, which were kind of known for having a lot of being rough around the edges, so to speak, but all, no matter what, no matter who you were visiting or who you were ministering to, they were all part of the family of God. So there's this great leveling that happens within the gospel and the preaching of the gospel and the ministry of the word, which I think you rightly point out kind of levels the playing field when it comes to social status, which is in a lot of ways so foreign. It's almost alien to us, especially now, like in 2025, when like as you mentioned, like no matter what we do or say or like what we post, it's even if it's innocent, there is a little bit of like social status game that we're playing. Like, it's that whole thing of like, you get 6 photos and everyone's crying and all but one, and then you post the one where everyone looks happy, and it's like, look at this great adventure.
Oh my gosh!
When it may not have always been that way, or I thinking about that, it reminds me of, and I'm gonna like, I hate to be the guy that like quotes the stand-up comedian bit because it's never as funny, but I always am reminded of that bit that Brian, I think I mentioned it to you that one time, that Brian Regan uses in that classic I Walked on the Moon, where he talks about, like the guy, the me monster at the dinner party, and he's talking about me and all the things he's done, and how he wishes that he could just be an astronaut who can just totally one up any sort of social status story that's being told, because he can just say at any time he wants, I walked on the moon, and then no one can top that. And I think we all, I think, are striving in some weird way for our own I walked on the moon sort of story. And that way we can kind of beat anyone else's social status. I don't know. I think it's fascinating because I think the gospel kind of informs us on that, even if we don't consciously think of it that way.
Yeah. And what's so funny is I absolutely agree with everything that you're saying, but I've been studying this for, at least 2, maybe 3 years now. And it's like every day I notice a new way that this kind of pops up. So Soren Kierkegaard, he has this, it's like one of his lesser known works called Without Assumption, but he's talking about the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, right? So the Pharisee and the tax collector, they're both in the same temple, but the Pharisee, he prays and he says, thank God that I am not like other men, that I'm not like this tax collector over here. Like, thank God that I'm a pious person, that I live my life in a righteous way, and that I look the way that I do. I can seem the way that I do. But then this tax collector, he beats his chest and just says, have mercy on me, Father, for I have sinned. And Jesus says the point of the parable is, to be the tax collector. The tax collector is the one who actually leaves forgiven. But when Kierkegaard was talking about this story, he was like, the thing that happens in that story is that people read it and they say, I do not want to resemble that Pharisee. I'm going to resemble that tax collector. But when they say I'm going to resemble that tax collector and I'm going to be like that tax collector, they're also subtly putting down that Pharisee. And then in their mind, they've also taken on this complex where now when they do see somebody who is practicing public piety, they feel superior to that person because now they've read this parable where Jesus condemns that person in favor of this other person. And so that, that just blew my mind because I'm like, I've been thinking about this for years now. But there are just so many little ways that this pops in. And I'm like, every time that I've read that parable, every time that I've heard it spoken aloud, I identify with the tax collector and I subtly condemn the Pharisee. I feel superior to them after having heard that. And so it's just crazy, man.
That's such a great point. And, people in my church have probably heard me say this, but anytime that you feel like you're ready to like vilify the Pharisee, we need to stop because we should probably look in the mirror and say, I am the Pharisee. And I think once we realize that, like, I don't know, I've been reading these stories, since I was a kid. Like I grew up in Sunday school, as I told you, like my dad and granddad were in the ministry and stuff like that. So I've heard these stories so often. And I think in a way, maybe it's not intentional, but in a way, sometimes we can tell stories like the one you're mentioning in Luke 18, the Pharisee and the publican, as if like the Pharisee is like the Disney villain, and like the publican is like the up and coming, like it's like Hunchback of Notre Dame, he's Quasimodo, and then the other guy in there, he's the Pharisee, whatever. But that totally misses the point of those stories, because more often than not, we're the Pharisee. In all these little scenarios where we see someone else's weakness or impiety, we suddenly have this urge to like point out our own or signal our virtue, which is so easily able to do in this day and age where we can post like whatever we want. So that's such a good reminder. Like we're the Pharisee, which I think again is kind of like the point of the work of God's word, which is to humble us, but then also to build us back up by God's grace, to the work of the law and the gospel on us. And I think that, that's such a good point.
Amen, man. Yeah, absolutely.
So as you're navigating this research, how does that play into, like you kind of mentioned that some of this research that you're doing for your PhD kind of ekes its way out through Substack. How have you, do you just go on tangents when you're writing essays, like from your other research, or is this just like part of all that, and these are going to be like chapters in your book, or how does that play out?
So that's actually a really great question. So a lot of it does come from the dissertation, but one of the things about Substack, and I don't know if you know this, so there's this novelist, her name is R.F. Kuang. She had this big book named Yellowface. It came out maybe 2 years ago now. But she had this event in my hometown, and my wife and I went, and she was doing this Q&A session, and she writes nonfiction too. And so I went up to the front of the room and I asked her, like, so I know that you write fiction, but when you're writing nonfiction, how is that different? You know, she was really skilled at both, but I was thinking, like, are you accessing just different parts of your brain or something? Like, how are you making both of these two genres compute? And she explained that when you're writing nonfiction, like good kind of nonfiction, not like academic dissertations. Unfortunately, like even my dissertation is not good nonfiction. It's not something that people are going to find pleasure reading unless you're just insane, over the top academic kind of person or whatever.
I'll read it, Griffin. I'll read it.
Oh, thanks, man. You'll be one of the 4 people who read it. Appreciate that. But she was saying that if you're actually trying to create good nonfiction, the point is not that you assemble good facts or that you assemble good insights. You have to frame it in terms of a story. That just is the most important part. And I mean, she was right. I mean, just looking at the stuff that she was putting out in terms of nonfiction, I think she's on Substack as well. But even just in terms of other theological writers that I enjoy, other psychological writers and stuff that I enjoy, no matter what, the best books, the best stories, the best forms of writing are always built around some sort of narrative. They are never just content dumping, like this person said this or this theologian said this, just fact after fact after fact after fact, which is honestly how I did most of my writing up until that point. I just was like, let's just get to the facts or the quotes, which is the bread and butter of everything. So when I realized that, I started thinking, like, I have to, if I'm going to do nonfiction that people actually do want to read as opposed to an academic dissertation, I have to frame it in terms of a story. So when I'm thinking about Substack, I usually will start with an idea that I really liked. So it'll be something like Miroslav Volf released a book about striving for superiority. He talks about how people are really obsessed with achievement. They want to outdo one another in one way or another. And then I'll connect that with a story of my own struggle with wanting to strive for superiority. And then I'll connect it with another analogy that frames it within a larger narrative. And then it's like, okay, that's how I formulate an actual essay in that sense. Because, you know, cause it's like, I personally just find the stuff about Miroslav Volf and what he said here about striving for superiority. To me, I'm like, that is the best stuff. But I'm like, I know I cannot just get people to read something about that. Like, I have to frame it. Here's an intro story. Here's another little story after that to, like, you know, sandwich it or whatever you want to call it. And yeah, even with writing for Christianity Today, that was a big thing with a lot of their editors. Like, you know, when I was emailing with them, they were like, we love your idea, but you have to put it in a story. Like, you have to put it in a narrative, or else it's just not going to work. And so anyways, that was just a long-winded way to say that I do borrow a lot from my PhD for when I'm writing on Substack, when I'm writing for other publications. But in general, the biggest difference is when I'm actually trying to write something that will appeal to people's hearts, their emotions, or actually draw people into something beautiful, I have to find a good story. But once all those things fall into place, then I'm like, we're good.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think it helps not only just in writing, but I would even say, like, in my context, in my vocation, which, you know, I prepare and deliver weekly sermons, I'm always, you know, I always try and gear myself up for them. But like on the Sundays when that's like an easy story to unfold, I'm a little bit more amped for it, I have to say. But that's what I'm always trying to do, is figure out what's the story, even within, you could say, like a text like in, you know, like Philippians or like Colossians, figuring out and deciphering what the story is behind what Paul is saying and why he's saying these things to these people in this time, because that story is always going to come across way more profound or resonant than if I were just say, here's what this verse means and here's how it applies to you. It's not, like you said, it's not just an information dump, but you're conveying a story. And I think what's so helpful about that point is the fact that this is always how the gospel has been conveyed. Like if you go back from like the time of Abraham all the way through to like David and all the way down to even when Christ is, you know, is on the road to Emmaus with the two unnamed disciples there in Luke 24, it's always revolving around the story that God has kind of woven into history through Scripture. And I think that's what's so key, is keeping the narrative and the story, which is usually centered, almost always centered around Christ, keeping that at the forefront. So in our writing or in our preaching, story is what drives truth and what drives, I would even say, change. If you're trying to compel people to or if you're trying to persuade them to change their minds about a certain thing, or to be convicted about a certain thing, or to be comforted in a certain thing, story is was going to be the most powerful sort of vehicle for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I can't remember I just taught a hermeneutics class, so I should have this off the top of my head, but I think it's like 58% of the Bible is narrative or something.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what the exact ratio is, but there's a reason why so much of it is in narrative. It's because like that transcend, like I can't remember who said this, but it was one of the big atheists from the early 2000s. They were making this complaint about the Bible where they were saying, I would believe the Bible if they had E equals MC squared written somewhere in there, or like a theory of, relativity of magnetism or whatever. Just made up something there, my bad. Yeah. But he was just saying, like, then I would believe the Bible if, something as prescient as those things was implanted in there. And one of the responses that I saw to this, I think Justin Brierley said it, but he was like, if the Bible had written E equals MC squared in there, it would not have made sense to anyone in history or culture up until like 1911. Like that, mm-hmm. it would never have made sense. It's just a ridiculous thing to ask. And so one of the things about the Bible, about just the narrative of the gospel in general, is that it is in the form that transcends all cultures, all education levels, all everything. It's like, yeah, you can get a PhD in this stuff and you can learn it so deeply and like have all of these different realms and levels of understanding to it. But at the same time, you could have no educational background and you could hear the story of the Pharisee and the tax collector, and it actually impacts you in your heart because you see that humility that the tax collector has and how it actually changes his heart and turns him into something. It turns him away from his wickedness, his self-centeredness, and actually helps him see beyond that. It's like everyone can get that.
That's so good. And it reminds me of one of my favorite theological books, which is Sally Lloyd Jones's The Jesus Storybook Bible, which, in the intro, have you ever read that?
No, I haven't.
Oh, yeah. So the introduction to this kid's Bible, which is the Jesus Storybook Bible, the introduction that Sally Lloyd Jones writes is, I think, one of the most pointedly profound pieces of writing in terms of what the Bible is, which is it's all a story and it all revolves around Jesus, of course. And like she makes this case in a really childlike way, but I think that's what makes it so profound, is that the whole Bible tells one story and it's all about Jesus. And that's what, all of the pages of the rest of this Jesus Storybook Bible are going to show, is how it's always pointed to Jesus. But I always go back to that because there's a reason why. So another tangent. I preached on, I preached through the books of 1st and 2nd Kings like 2 years ago or so, which is kind of daunting because they cover so much history within the Old Testament. Yeah. But what's even more fascinating is the fact that they skip like bulks of history. There's large gaps of history that are not recorded in those books, which is purposeful because the Bible is not a history book. It's not a science book. It's not a math book. It's not an ethics book even. The Bible is a book of revelation, and that story which reveals Christ is what is most paramount and prevailing through everything. And when you kind of like come to that realization, that's kind of what like unlocks the Bible in a way, because now we understand that there's one narrative being told, and that's why this story is included and this other piece of history is not, because there's a narrative that's driving what's being recorded. And I think that that's so helpful, and that narrative always, drives us to see the Redeemer.
Oh, I love it, man. But so is that it's an adult book, but it's written in child?
No, it's a kid's book.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah. The Jesus Storybook Bible. I'll send you.
I love it, man.
And I'll put the link in the notes because it like I say that facetiously. Like my favorite theological book is the Jesus Storybook Bible, but I also say it somewhat pointedly too, because if you read it, Sally Lloyd Jones goes through all these like, high, like, bird's eye view of like the Bible, and she's explaining it for kids. I could read it with my 6-year-old and my 8-year-old and they would get it. But it's also really profound because she's simplifying these stories in such a way where you get like the kernel of it. You get you get the core truth of all these stories, which again is the one story that God is telling throughout history and time, that man needs a savior, and that savior is Christ. And I think it's just such a fresh reminder to see that how that story is woven throughout all these different events and these crises that unfold in the Bible. But yeah, regardless, definitely read that if you haven't yet. It's really good.
Okay, you won me over.
Let's just talk a little bit more about Substack. Yeah, good. Let's talk a little bit more about Substack, because that's what everyone wants to talk about. We can go ahead and say it, Griff. I think you're a little bit Substack famous now. You've had some pieces go viral, your Comer piece or whatever, or even your one on prayer. So what is for aspiring writers? What are some things that you can what are some of your best practices, so to speak, or what are some ways in which you can kind of help others who are trying to, they have like 100 subscribers or whatever, maybe even less. What are some ways that you can say like, hey, just keep writing or whatever? What are some of the best practices or ways in which you've found success when you've hit writer's block even?
Oh man. Okay. So, I mean, just strictly just for the art of writing itself, I would say there's the book On Writing Well by William Zinsser, I believe. That one's incredible. Then A Swim in the Pond in the Rain by George Saunders. Those two books are so inspiring. Actually, I would also throw in Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. That is one that you will have so much fun with. And these three are specifically just deal with the art of writing itself. I mean, they helps me sort of see that there's so much more than just especially in Bird by Bird, she has all these jokes where it's like she would teach writers, she would have these writing cohorts and stuff like that. And she would teach them, the point is not to get published. The point is actually just to enjoy the art of writing. And then the students would immediately ask, okay, but how do you get published? Like, how do I get an agent? Like, how do I get published? And there was something about that was so funny, because in all of the stuff that I kind of knew about writing, it was like, okay, the goal is just to get published and there's nothing beyond that. But it just helped me see that you have to actually enjoy the craft for its own purpose, or else you're just going to kind of burn out and not have fun with it, and also just not create a beautiful product at the end of the day. And okay, so those three really helped out specifically, which is learning how to write well. And then for online writing specifically, because it's a totally different thing. I mean, you're not trying... If you're trying to write just online in general, you're not going to be wanting to write Ulysses by James Joyce. You're not going to want to be writing with the prose of Dallas Willard or something like that. I love Dallas Willard, but he is just not. If he started the Substack, I'm not sure how his pieces would go. It's not the kind of digestible stuff that an online audience would really go for. All respect to him. He's one of my favorites. But 3 books for that. I can't remember the authors' names, but Write Useful Books, which might sound paradoxical because I'm talking about online writing. But if you read it, it'll make sense. It's like it's basically how to write the kind of content that people will recommend or share or want to read more. And so, I mean, just really ask basic questions about why you're writing what you're writing. So just to frame it up in like a Christian world example, the guy's not a Christian, but for a Christian world example, it's like, okay, you want to write a book on prayer. Think about every other book that has been written about prayer. What about your book makes it unique in any way? What do you have to offer that would actually make people want to recommend your book as opposed to every other one of the books about prayer that have come out for the last 2,000 years? And just asking simple questions like that, take this with a Substack or writing for Christianity Today or any of these other publications. It's like, if you're writing a piece, are there other pieces that are better than that you could just recommend people to? And so it's like, how can you actually create something unique that people would actually enjoy for its own merit? And that if people are looking for a reference, like, if people are like, hey, do you know of a good book about prayer? Or do you know a good article about prayer? What would make your article one that they would actually send to them, as opposed to Prayer by Tim Keller or, just one of these other books or articles about prayer? So that one was really good for that kind of thing. And then Smart Brevity. I don't do this well, but these guys just like perfect advice just for online writing. They're like, they give you just such good advice about how to trim everything down to its barest possible denominator or whatever you want to call it. It's just so actually helpful for that, and it gives you a good grip of the average attention span that most readers, especially online spaces, are especially in the online spaces that they have, right? So there's some statistics in there where it's like the average person only spends I think 26 seconds on any page that they open on the entire internet and all of the browsers, an average of 26 seconds. And so it's like, okay, if you're writing a Substack post, that's going to be at least like, what, a 14-minute read or something like that. You're like, how can I literally trick this person into wasting more time here? Like, is there anything I can do to actually hook them into that? And so it gives a very realistic estimation of how you should go about online writing, because it just tells you these are the statistics and the research about how bored people get, or how naturally bored people get, and how fast they get uninterested, or that they want to back out of the webpage. And the third one is The Art and Business of Online Writing by Nicholas Cole. And this one is also a little bit humbling, because this guy, Nicholas Cole, he's apparently the most read online writer out of anyone on the entire internet, but I had no idea I'd never heard his name before, which was very
neither till just now.
Yeah, which is so interesting, because like I think out of all the writers on the whole internet, he's been read the most, but I could not tell you who he was. Like it's never crossed my mind before, and so I think it's like a good estimation. Like it's like a humbling reality that it's like, if I'm going to be a writer, I should not expect like any sort of like fame or anything like that. And anyway, so his book is just super practical. It gives you like actual ideas about how you can go about writing well online, and then even gives you some of the more like practical ends of, hey, you're probably not going to get rich or rich very easily. He does give you a little bit of a plan, but it's like, I don't know how easy that is to pull off. He seems like he was just preternaturally gifted in that way. But anyways, those 6 books, fantastic. And then just like also, you have to read yourself, which is another thing that I always tell people is like, you have to read yourself, because if you read yourself, you know what's good and you know what's not. You know, if you read one book a year, it's going to be very hard for you to be able to tell like what is actually good reading and what is actually good writing, as opposed to somebody who's, reading, a few books a month or something like that. Because as you read a book, as you read more articles, as you read anything, you consume more, written content or whatever you want to call it. You start to understand, okay, I enjoy this, and I can identify the things about this that I enjoy. I'm locked in. I know what's good. I know what I like about this. And so then when you actually get it to your own writing, you just look at it and you say, do I actually like this? This is actually what I do. For a full week before I post something, this is actually what I do. It's like, I'm not really doing much editing. All the research is done. I just read it over and over and again. And I'm like, do I actually like this? Like, if I was a reader, would I actually be interested in what's going on here? And I usually end up having to cut out like 1,000 words, because I'm like, I would lose interest in this if I was there. So anyways, that's just my process. I probably overthink it, but that's what I like to do.
I think writers and overthinkers are like the same people oftentimes. So they go hand in hand in a lot of ways. So to that end, what is something like that really just, it's that proverbial saying, like, what gets you up in the morning when it comes to writing? Like, what is that thing that just drives you? Because you've kind of carved out a little niche for yourself, and there's a like, I know what I'm going to get now when I read a Griffin Gooch piece in some ways, not like all the time, but like I can kind of like, I don't know where you're going with certain things, but like, I'm gearing up for a certain thing. So what's that like morsel that you can't wait to like get at, but then also deliver to the people that you hope read? Oh man.
So I actually don't love the posting of an article or getting things published as much, because the second it's like out there in the world, it's no longer like a creation that you like can like work on and move all the parts around. It's now just out there in the world, and so now it's victim to public reception. which I've always found to just be the most difficult part about it. Because it's like, you might get some hate on something, or I mean, even worse than getting like a negative reaction is just getting no reaction. So it's like, oh man, it's just like a huge dopamine deficit or something like that.
You'd rather it be visceral one way or the other, not
yeah, exactly. It's like at least people know that they felt something, but if you just like absolutely nothing happens with it whatsoever, it just puts you in this weird limbo. So the thing that gets me, I mean, I don't know. This is a huge side trail to take things down, but I mean, I know that I'm supposed to write because people have given me so many prophetic words in my life that this is just what I'm supposed to do. And so even though it's not like, I'm not banking on it like paying the bills or anything like that. But I just make sure that no matter what happens, I am writing, because it's like, this is what I was called to do. Like people have told me, hey, I've heard this from the Lord. If you want to receive it, but you are going to be a writer one day. And I'm like, cool, that's great, but I'm going to get my PhD in this, have a professor job or something like that, because I'm not sure if I can support a family off of like $6 a month off Substack or whatever. But also just having that knowledge of that calling, just that understanding that other people in my life have affirmed this over me. They believe that the Lord has spoken this over my life. It gives me such an insane amount of pleasure to be able to get up every morning before I go to my actual day job and to work on something, to write something, to contribute to something. It literally just feels like kavod, or like the weight of God's glory. I mean, this is such a pretentious example of this. I don't equate myself to Eric Liddell in any way, but Eric Liddell was the Chariots of Fire. What was it? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, Chariots of Fire is the name of it, right?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, the classic movie with the really famous song on the people running on the beach.
Oh, perfect. Okay, I was just making sure that I got that right. My bad.
Yeah.
So he had this thing where he's like, he was a famous runner. He's one of the greatest runners of all time. And he had this line where he's like, when I run, I feel God's pleasure. And me, like, it just feels so lame to actually even make this comparison, even in the slightest. But it's like, when I write, it's like, I know that this is what I'm supposed to do. Like, it just feels so good. It feels like just my brain is on fire and I'm just so happy and just in the moments or like flow or whatever you want to call it. But it is just so much fun. But then the posting it, then I get kind of sad because I'm like, people didn't like it or they were mean about it in some way or another.
That is, well, number one, I think that's truly remarkable, only because I'll say it this way, because I can relate only because, like, I know that I'm called to preach God's word. And so, like, the similar things that you're describing are things that I sense or anticipate every Sunday. There's, like, this anxiety that's, like, good when I'm getting ready to preach, because I'm, like, excited. It's like, it reminds me of, like, when I was, like, back in high school getting ready to play in a basketball game. I'm just, like, amped and I'm excited. There's, like, this eager anxiety that's like coursing, because I can't wait to bring this word to these people. And like, so what, like, and it's developed for me over time. But this, like, the thing that gets me up is just that idea of how can I always show people the certainty of what Christ did for them. And like, that's the same thing that drives like the things that I write about too, is like, I don't want anyone to go to my Substack and go away without hearing about Christ and what he did for them. Like, that's always what I'm doing. And the same thing is happening when I preach too. Like, that's why I'm really, you use the word pretentious, I can use the same word. I'm kind of dogmatic, if you want to use that word, in terms of like the things I preach about. It's always going to be driven back to that, because I don't want to sell people short of what's going to actually give them relief or hope or peace or joy, or what is actually going to fill them. It's always Christ. He's always the answer. And so it's truly, it's definitely a gift of God when that calling is kind of like solidified in you and in your own brain. Like, it's not like I don't know about you, but like, I can't always like necessarily point to like a moment. Like, I don't know if I have like a Damascus Road moment like Paul did, when I was like, man, I know I'm supposed to do this, but it's like, I was like, you can talk a little about this perhaps, but like, as I was developing my own theological leanings and interests and so on and so forth, there was like all these. I didn't always have an outlet for it. That's what got me to start writing online, because I was looking for a way to explore theology in a way that I could kind of just think out loud about it. And then the more I did that, the more I got into church ministry and church life and all that kind of stuff. And that's where I am now, where I've been pastoring for 6 years. And so that same idea is like, would you say that there was like a moment, or was it something that kind of developed in you where like, I know I'm called to do this?
Oh man. Okay, that's a great question. But I'm actually going to say it was a little bit of both. So
Yeah.
I felt called to write a book on New Year's Eve of 2019, I think it was. And I was like, I just felt like I really needed to write a book. So from that moment, it was like, I need to get serious about writing. And it was very slow, very lazy. Did not make a lot of progress with it or anything like that. But then the week before this is the big inciting incident, which is like a narrative plot line. This is the inciting incident. Was
in the hero's journey, right?
Yeah. Exactly. So the week before my wife and I were going to get married, so this was May of 2021, my wife's dad, I married a PK, so the head pastor of our church called me to his office, and he told me that he had something for me. And he told me this story about how when my wife, Tiffany, was in high school, he was scrolling through eBay, and my father-in-law, he collects really nice pens, like Mont Blanc pens and stuff like that. Like he was just very interested in that kind of stuff. And he saw this pen that was made by Tiffany & Co. And I think it was made during like World War II or something like that. And he felt that the Holy Spirit told him to buy that pen for Tiffany's future husband because he was going to be a writer. And so the week before we got married, he gives me this pen. He's like, "You are going to be a writer, and you should use this pen just to write love notes to Tiffany." And that was so shocking to me, because I mean, I was like 22 at the time or something like that. And the idea that just before that, I had also started like writing like slightly on there, it just, the chances of that were just astronomical. Like it still blows my mind even as I'm just thinking about it right now. And so that was the big incident where I was like, I actually have to get serious about this. It started turning into this thing where it's like, if I don't write, then I felt like I was actually dishonoring this call that had been placed on my life. So that was the big one. And then a lot of just other tiny ones came after that. But then slowly but surely, I got into a point where I'm just more like confident. Like I'm less insecure about it now. I'm more just like, this is what I'm called to do. And so I'm just going to do it. And I'm going to have a lot of joy in the process.
Yeah. That's awesome. What a great, like, affirming event for you. But then also you talk about the process of writing. What is, like, you don't have to necessarily share your whole process, but like, what's your process when you're thinking about a piece? Like, I know you said you kind of take and use and remix maybe some of your own stuff from your research, but like, is it just something that like sticks in your head, like a song you can't get out of, and you feel like, I got to write about this? Or like, how does that work?
Yeah, no, that's 100%. That's absolutely it. It's I can't remember who it was, but there was this one film director, it might have been Quentin Tarantino or something like that. But he was just talking about his process of making films, and he was just saying the way that they materialize is that just something comes in their mind, and it's like you cannot stop thinking about that until it's like out. And so he would like draft his movies. He's like, okay, it's good, it's there, and now I can like stop thinking about it and just kind of move on. And yeah, so I mean, that's kind of the way when I'm thinking about just writing. Or I just submitted a book proposal, so hopefully I'll have one of those out sometime in the next like year or two. But yeah, it's just like this idea where I'm like, I have something there, and it like literally needs to come out. And it's like, I'm almost not going to be like happy or enjoy myself until I like put it down. And it's like, I don't need to get it down perfectly, but there's just some days where I'm like, if I don't get this full, just rough draft just out, then I'm just going to feel agitated. Because there's just something about it where it's like, yeah, you just have to do it. And
yeah,
I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain, or some people can't relate to that. They're just like, I'm kind of strange, or just have odd proclivities or whatever. But it's like, yeah, it's just kind of how it works.
Yeah, no, I totally relate. There's way too many notes on my computer of just really scatterbrained ideas where I'm like, I know I had an idea there like maybe a month or two ago, and I go back to it and I'm like, I'm not sure where I was going with that, but I know there was an idea there originally.
Yeah,
there's a draft there somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, some of them just confuse me nowadays because I'll have this idea where I'm like, this is going to be it. Like this is going to be the best thing anyone's ever written, and then I'll look at it like a year later and I'll just have no idea what I was talking about.
Here's a question: have you ever written a piece like for Substack recently, or whatever, and you decided not to publish it and you just deleted it totally?
Like, do you mean like fully deleted from like even my Microsoft Word?
Well, no, it's still on like in your drafts folder, but you're not going to publish it. I was just curious because I've done that, and I was just curious if anyone else has.
Yeah, no. Usually when I get to the point of Substack, like being in there, I'm like, I'm pretty confident about it. But yeah, it has happened probably like 3 times, I would say, over the course of the past year. But usually I'll stop myself before I get so far as to
get too far down the rabbit
like
hole.
Formatted and put pictures. Once I get like formatted in pictures, I almost feel like I'm in too deep and I have to just keep going.
You can't turn back now.
Yeah.
Let's pivot just a little bit. Talk about your journey of faith. You kind of mentioned a little bit about this, I think, in your piece about John Mark Comer and how not only just influential he was on you, but just kind of like you were learning from him also as you were kind of having your theology be developed and so on and so forth. So kind of talk about that, how you were kind of your journey of faith, how you were brought to Christianity, and kind of like where you are now as opposed to like maybe where you were like 6 years ago.
Yeah. So I was raised in the church vaguely. Like we went to, big Sunday gatherings here and there, like I think Christmas and Easter. It was like, that was pretty standard. But we weren't really committed. Like I was never in youth group, had no like Bible college or anything like that. I committed to atheism pretty hardcore when I was like 13 or 14, which I know is a weirdly young age to commit to something like that. But I just saw no visible or even experiential validity in any of the Christianity that I had seen up until that point. Like I'd seen people in church talking about Jesus or like the Bible and stuff like that, but I'd never seen anyone actually live it out in a way that felt real or tangible or even something that was worth following in any sense. So I committed to atheism around 13 or 14. And then I got super into drugs and I got arrested a few times. And then I went to jail several times. And then on the last time that I was in jail, a group of missionaries came into our jail cell and they did this like church service, this just like impromptu church service where they just sang some worship songs on the acoustic guitar and then just gave this message just talking about, offering Jesus, like, a standard altar call essentially. And so it just hit me for the first time that this was just real. And it just took that moment of being like, okay, I actually see some genuineness in these missionaries. They're giving up their time, their energy, and their livelihood just to come in here and present this gospel to people who society would deem not worthy of receiving anything. Right. And so I accepted it in that moment. And then when I got out, probably 24 hours after that, I joined a campus ministry and got plugged in and just literally just got so devoted to it, just an insane amount. I think I joined like 3 small groups so that I was just in it like constantly, like every night of the week, and just became so obsessed with it. And I just knew that I was going to do ministry in some form. And so I kept up ministry related aspirations for like 4 years. I was doing worship leading a lot because I had a lot of background in music. And then I moved to Los Angeles for a worship leader internship at this church. And while I was there at this church, I strained my vocal cords beyond repair. My voice, I don't know what it sounds like on a podcast, but it's much more gravelly and low than it used to be. And I can't get it much. The loudest that it's gotten on this podcast is as loud as I can possibly make it in general. It just doesn't, it just caps out at a certain point. And so I had a lot of just existential dread at that point, and I could not wrap my mind around why my vocal cords wouldn't heal. I went and saw like 3 ENT doctors about this, and they were like, there's nothing wrong with them necessarily. It just looks like you have the vocal cords of an 80-year-old man rather than a 22-year-old person. And so, which was not what I wanted to hear. I was like hoping there could just be some surgery or some quick fix, but there wasn't. And it's just how it is. And so it's like, I had these dreams of becoming a worship leader, totally fell apart. And I had to move back home to Michigan. And while I was there, just had a lot of just doubt, and went through a very difficult time just trying to reconcile like the God who was loving and just and fair and answered prayer and everything like that with like the current reality that I was living through. Yes, so many people have been through worse situations too. But I mean, just in my short lifetime, I was like, just a tough situation, hard for me to make sense of. But over the course of just like a few months of just being back home and just trying to figure out like how I could, still honor God with my abilities, I started just getting a little bit more into kind of like the teaching aspect of things, like trying to give more like sermons and talks. And I even like taught a few classes at my local church. And then I did also hear about this guy named John Mark Comer, which that really blew my mind in a sense, because up until that point, I had not heard somebody who could articulates the Christian faith in a way that was dynamic and transcended just the basic truths of the Bible, but it also brought in like a cornucopia of all the different aspects of life and the world and academic disciplines, and put them all under one banner and showed this beautiful, beautiful potential that the gospel could have. And I remember that just blew my mind, and it still blows my mind to this day. Like, people like John Mark Comer, and there's a tons of others who are doing very similar things to him nowadays, but he was the first one that I remember ever hearing. And I just remember that blew my mind. And I was like, if that's even possible to teach like this, and that's even possible to communicate the gospel in a way that's, because one of the things that blew my mind about him is like his books like Ruthless Elimination of Hurry were getting read by secular people, like people who were not even following Jesus. They were reading it as if it was actually going to help them. And so, it just blew my mind that was even possible. And so I was like, if teaching like that or writing like that, communicating like that is even possible, I'm fine with not being a worship leader. I just want to pursue that. And so that's one of the reasons why I got into academia. That's one of the reasons why I started teaching more frequently. And it's one of the reasons why I got more into writing. It was like, I want to, it just painted a vision of something that I didn't think was possible up until that point.
Yeah. So it's fascinating how God uses these very diverse events in your life to bring you to certain points or like waypoints. You can think about that like rock bottom moment when you're in jail, when you're incarcerated, is kind of part of this. And like, this is always the thing that is at once like fascinating but endlessly compelling, which is just the fact that we can't always perceive where these sort of junctures are going to be. We can only understand or perceive them in hindsight. And like, in the moment, they feel awful and horrible. But in the hindsight, when we can look at them in the aftermath, we can understand that even right there was goodness unfolding. There was grace unfolding right in front of you. And I think that's the kind of stuff that really like just gets me going, just because it's amazing how God uses different events to bring people to that same realization, to where what we've been talking about, this story that God has told through the person of his son is what brings, no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter what background you have, it brings you to this moment of, I'm all you need and I'm all you can cling to. And like, what a great testimony that is, that you can share. And now, like the great platform that God has graced you with, like now we can understand what was happening maybe in some small way, and why he's brought you to this point. So it's just awesome to hear you testify to that grace in your own life. That's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate that. And you're so right.
Yeah. And so let's go here too, because in your book, Do Not Lose Heart, which you can find on Amazon, you describe yourself as a Gen Zer. I don't really know like where the different generations go. You know,
Yeah.
I think I'm a millennial. I was born in 1990, so I guess that makes me a millennial. I don't really know all the things. Um, but okay, let's say you had to, let's say you're representing Gen Z. What would you say to like the church of the millennials or the church of the Gen Xers? What would you say to them in terms of like how your generation's view of faith and religion maybe is, it's the same, but it's also different. And like maybe, I don't know if this relates to John Mark Comer per se, but like just how would you say that like maybe there's, we don't have to talk about the generational gap if you don't want to, but like how would you say like maybe there's been like a mark that's been missed in terms of how this is communicated or how it could be communicated, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So I would love to make a bunch of generalizations about how past generations did church and everything like that, but I don't. I don't have a perfect grasp of that or anything like that. But I will say something that I did notice even in my early church experience, like after I had converted to Christianity when I was in early college, and even a little bit beyond that. One of the things I saw that characterized a lot of the not necessarily millennial, but definitely Gen X and baby boomer kind of generation of church, I saw a lot of fear and paranoia and almost like an us versus them, or I think Tim Keller would call it like Christ against culture, like that kind of thing, where it became this sense of, yes, we'll go to church, we'll tithe, but it's for the sake of like fortifying a stronger church so that we can be a stronger like entity or body of people within a larger political system or something like that. Not necessarily that everybody was always thinking in terms of like, let's elect this person into office or anything like that. Because that lots of people in Christian churches are definitely political or anything like that, but it's not like the most blatant things about everybody's personality in general from like what I've seen, even though it can be for a lot. But it was like this fear and paranoia that almost like defined their stance to everything. Where it was like, I can't watch that because I'm fearful of that, or I'm paranoid about like my neighbor because I'm not sure if they have the same beliefs that I do, or they hung up one of those signs where I can't remember what they're called, but it's like love is love and water is life. Or do you know what I'm talking about?
I think so. Yeah. I don't know what they're called either.
I only remember like two of them or something. But anyways, I'm sure people will understand what I'm talking about. But anyways, like just having a paranoia about that, as opposed to realizing that we have access to the most joyful philosophical system that's ever been invented and the most amazing theological invitation that we could ever fathom in our wildest dreams. And we'll never be able to fully fathom it because we'll just be reveling in the joy of it for our entire existence, for all of eternity. Like that is what Christianity is. Like it is for the sake of creating a flourishing community between God and man, and eventually a new heavens and a new earth, right? Like that is the eschatological vision, the beatific vision. And that is like one of these central theses of our faith. It's one of the biggest parts of our doctrine. And so one of the things that I do see different within Gen Z is they are so hungry or excited about that. Like they are able to compartmentalize some of the stuff about like, yes, there are going to be people who are against us. There's going to be division. There's going to be hatred. There's going to be people who oppose us in this way or another. But rather than taking that and being like having like a fearful or stance that's like, let's, bear up our walls and protect ourselves and coil ourselves into like a net of comfort away from anything that might corrupt it. I just see generally more openness to really seeing and experiencing and living that life of the kingdom that Jesus offered, like taking those promises and the ethics and the message of the Sermon on the Mount and actually just living into them and not just seeing them as some far off ethic that's unrealizable. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I see so much is just like Gen X, not even just church or anything, even beyond church, just like all of like culture in general, like most generations are dealing with a failed vision of happiness. It's like they were told that if they, make enough money, or they get this job, or they achieve this much, or they get that wife, or they get that car, or they climb the top of the corporate ladder, or they, even if you don't even take like American values of success or anything like that, but some other people might be like, no, the point is like mindfulness, or, just living a simple lifestyle or anything like that. So, I mean, all of these different visions of happiness essentially fail. Like they fall in on themselves. Like secular people can be happy, but I do not believe that they can have the extent of happiness that is available to us through the gospel, just because that's a foundational theological theme, is that, when we see the face of God, like it says in like the last chapter of Revelation, it's like one day we will see him face to face, and he will wipe away every tear from our eye. Like that is happiness, that is joy. And I believe that that is the fullest extent to it. And so the secular culture in general, or even just Christians who are somewhat devoted, but not really devoted to it, they're just dealing with these so many different visions of failed happiness. And they have all of these different pathways to what human flourishing is, because that's one of the fundamental human questions. They're asking, how do I live a good life? How do I live a flourishing life? But everywhere they're going, it's failing, it's falling short. It's like, the entire system is breaking and crumbling under them. But then Christianity can come in, and it can offer these things, and it can tell them, this is the way to a joyful life. This is the way to life to the full. And so, sorry, I'm going on a little bit of tangent here, but I see Gen Z being so much more open to that aspect of it. Like, yes, all of these things are going to fail. I am not going to be happy if I have 1 million followers on Instagram. I'm not going to be happy if I have a 4-story home. I'm not going to be happy if I have a nice car, or if I have all of these temporal objects that are going to, promise fulfillment, like, in an advertisement. All advertising in general, it's just trying to be like, if you buy this, you will be happy, because, it's appealing to that base instinct of wanting to flourish, wanting to live a good life. But all of those things are empty, and eventually they will realize that to one extent or another. So Gen Z can just sort of, I don't know, it's just what I see among my friends and among other Gen Z writers and speakers that I see, is like they see, no, like all of those things. It's almost like Ecclesiastes in a sense, where it's like you can toil and you can work, you can have all those things, and that's fine, but it's not going to fulfill you. And yeah, so anyways, long tangent, but I would just say Gen Z loves joy. They love the joy aspect of theology.
I think that's such a good point. Only because even if, like, again, we don't have to generalize or like paint with really broad brushes, but like there is a sense, like even I've felt this, even if it wasn't an explicit motive, there's an implicit sort of maybe unintentional byproduct of the way in which the gospel sometimes communicated, which, as you kind of note, I liked your word, it kind of incites paranoia or fear of this other person, or fear of this unknown event that's coming down the pike, and all those sorts of things. And again, maybe it wasn't intentional, but and that just brings this sense of like dread and anxiety over what is about to occur, or what may occur, whatever, what have you. And I think something that's like definitely changed for me over the last several years is just the certainty of Christ's work and what that offers the sinner. No matter, where they are in their quote unquote spiritual journey. I don't care, like, your sanctification level. It doesn't really matter to me. The certainty of Christ and what he's done for you, that is the heartbeat of joy and faith. And like, that's kind of what Paul gets at in Philippians, which is, often called like the joy letter that Paul writes. He talks about just, whether he's abounding or whether he's abased, he's finding joy in Christ and finding his all of what he needs in this offer of what Christ has done for him. And everything else, to use the unchristian term, everything else is crap compared to what Christ has done for him. And I think that is that the certainty of that, and declaring that in a way where people can actually say, this is not a maybe or a might be, or this is not something that I have to work my way into. No, this is certain for you already. And that's what the gospel offers. That to me is a great incentivizing message of joy, which again is something that I strive. I won't say I always am successful in, but I strive to do that when I'm preaching, or strive to do that when I'm writing, just because, uh, I wrote about this recently. Just the idea of like, I feel like, at least for me, like I told you, I was born in 1990, and now I'm going on my own tangent. But sorry, but like, so I'm like in this. I'm in like, I feel like this like weird bridge generation where I knew what life was like before online was everywhere, and now I also know what it's like when you can't even imagine a world that's different than that. And I think that that's what allows, I think, for me in many ways to be really sympathetic to people that are a little bit younger than me, just because the world in which they've been growing up in, like not just church related, but just like society at large, is just light years different than the way even that I grew up. Like it's just totally light years different. I know we're not like breaking new ground by saying that, but like I think that should inform the way in which we communicate and the way in which we convey the truths that we hold dear. Not that we have to change them, but maybe sometimes the way in which the messaging of them, maybe it's a little bit different, or maybe the way we kind of attack or approach getting and conveying this particular truth. Which is to say, like, I really resonate with what you're saying, because I think it's a word that's needed for the church, no matter what generation you belong to.
Dude, yeah, absolutely.
What you said, you and a wife are big readers. What's something you're reading right now that's really capturing your attention?
Oh man. Okay, so I usually keep a rotation of like 6 books at the same time. So let me check. The fiction one I'm reading is this. It's called Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu. Really great book of short stories. Sorry, I got the pile like right next to me, so I'm looking at it. Then I'm reading For the Life of the World by Miroslav Volf and Matthew Croasman. Really, actually pretty relevant to this conversation that we were just having. It's trying to recapture a vision of theology as, it's trying to recapture a vision of theology as paving a way for a flourishing life, thinking about God's mission as creating a new home and inviting us into it. And so trying to recapture an idea of theology as God inviting us into his joyful processes. So I love that.
Yeah.
The Things of Earth by Joe Rigney, really good. If you're ever like a Christian who's struggling with feeling guilty about enjoying money or enjoying a nice vacation or a nice meal, great book, because it gives a good theology for how to enjoy the things of the earth. A psychology book that I wasn't sure I would enjoy, but I'm actually enjoying it a lot, called Validation by Caroline Fleck. I'm sure as a man you can probably relate to this, but males tend to approach all problems with a problem-solving mindset, where it's like, oh, you have a problem, let me try to solve it. It does not always go well with friends or with wives especially, right? So very helpful resource for actually how to hear people's problems and correspond in a way that's both loving and affirming, and just really helpful for emotional processes. And I think, that's pretty much about it for right now for what I'm reading.
That sounds like a good rotation. I'm not very disciplined. I probably have more than a dozen books that are open and in some semblance of being completed. And it's really bad.
I lose track at that point.
I would too. I'm very, like anal about the notes that I take. But I'm not very disciplined, because I buy new books and I'm like, I gotta read that one. And there's, that it's like that meme where like the skeleton's under the pool and like that one's dying. That's all my books that I should be reading. Those are the ones that are, I haven't read yet. But regardless, where can people find you, Griffin? Where's the best place to get your stuff or read your stuff?
Yeah, so definitely Substack, Reality Theology. It's pretty much the only social media that I'm active on. You can follow me on Instagram if you want to see me post once every 6 months. It'll just be some post being like, happy birthday to my wife or something like that. Mainly Substack. And you can just follow me there.
Yeah, go follow Griffin on Substack. He's a great read. Follow his notes. He has always little quippy stuff that he posts there too. So make sure you follow him. Griffin, it's so good to chat with you. Thanks for taking your time out this evening, and I'm looking forward to doing it again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Brad.